So in these narrow streets in the village of Fuentes de Onoro on the border between Spain and Portugal, British redcoats and their Portuguese allies took on the French Imperial Army. This battle has got everything. It's got bayonet duels, cavalry charges, and of course, very deadly street fighting. Stick with us as we're going to be walking the ground today, myself and friend of the show, Marcus Cribb. Wellington, an invincible commander impossible to beat. Except that wasn't quite the case. Today we're talking about a battle where he made many mistakes against a tough French army. Stay tuned to find out what happened. Okay, some quick background. In our recent video about the Lions of Torres Vedras, you saw the French defeated with barely a shot fired. They were forced to withdraw back to Spain, but they're now re-equipped, full of frogs' legs and cheap wine, and still commanded by Marshal Massena, the sweet child of victory. They're back and looking to relieve their comrades besieged in the fortress city of Almeida. They couldn't be allowed to do that. Almeida was a key to Portugal. The British and Portuguese needed to take it if they were to go on the offensive themselves. Wellington immediately concentrated his divisions for battle, but the ground wasn't that favourable. There weren't any steep ridgelines or rolling hills to defend. Therefore, he was forced to make the best of the terrain, and that was a position by the village of Fuentes de Onoro. This small Spanish village sits astride the road along which the enemy was advancing between Ciudad Rodrigo and Almeida. It's a jumble of narrow alleys, small cottages and high stone walls. On the edge of the village, running north to south, is the narrow and easily fordable Dos Casas River. So here in the village we do have some information boards. This one says the streets of Fuentes de Onoro witnessed bloody fighting from 3rd to the 5th of May 1811, when the town was the centre of a battle in which nearly 90,000 French, Portuguese, Spanish, German and British soldiers fought for control of the border. Wellington had at his disposal 34,000 infantry, of which 23,000 were British. There was nearly 2,000 cavalry and 48 guns. He felt confident that this force was sufficient. The 5th and 6th divisions were tasked with holding his naturally strong left flank, which was anchored by the derelict but still formidable Fort Concepcion. The 1st, 3rd and newly formed 7th division and light divisions were deployed around Fuentes de Onoro. Inside the village, 28 detached companies of light troops and riflemen, over 2,000 men in total, were posted. Opposite the light troops in the village was a thick mass of 5 entire divisions from the French 6th and 9th Corps. Massena, like Wellington, clearly recognised that the village of Fuentes de Onoro was the key to the battle. Early on the afternoon of the 3rd of May 1811, the French attacked. So mate, we're stood right in the middle of Fuentes de Onoro. It's this beautiful, almost medieval old village. We've got the church behind us, which was scene of some heavy fighting. Can you talk us through what happened here on that first day in the village?
Yes, absolutely. Don't think a lot's changed in 200 years in terms of the town, does it? It's very sleepy if anybody comes here. There's no shops and cafes nearby in this old part of the town. But you've got these high stone walls that certainly saw a lot of the fighting. And what happened is the detached light companies under Colonel William Williams of the Rifles, William Williams, his troops have pushed forwards and then have been slowly forced back up just past the church. And that's when we get the Highland charge. We've got the Highland Light Infantry and the Cameron Highlanders, and they fix bayonets, shouting Scots Gaelic, and they charge down these streets and they push the French out, basically screaming both sides.
Good lads.
And out to the side. And you can just kind of imagine that kind of Highland spirit and the little bit of gravity going down this slope. There's some high ground towards Wellington's position, driving that impetuous charge, pushing them. And if they stop and fall, some hilted Highlanders going to get them with the bayonet at the end of the land pattern.
And we don't want to know what happens next. Not pleasant.
No, it's a really difficult fight for both sides.
And one thing we don't hear that much about during the Napoleonic Wars, well, particularly here in the Peninsula, I guess, because there was so much open space, you don't hear a lot about street fighting.
No, it's quite different. It tends to happen at a much rarer level because you lose your command and control. These high stone walls don't look like they've changed much in 200 years, and that's the kind of thing they would have seen. You lose your command and control, officers can't control men, sergeants can't shout and scream to them to get into line, so you're down to individuals having to make their decisions.
But in those days, would they have had any understanding of sort of small unit fire and manoeuvre tactics like soldiers would use now in this sort of environment? Or would it just have been charge and hope for the best?
No, except for the light infantry, really. So light infantry and light companies and rifles, they pair fire and manoeuvre, and they're covering each other, one firing, one reloading or moving. And it also means they're really importantly taught to think for themselves, or think in pairs, without an NCO, without an officer nearby. Their command to whistle blows, so they're listening out and can move back. But if they're the wrong side of a wall, you hope them and their mate will make the right decision and take initiative. And that's very different to some of the line infantry regiments.
So the counter-attack through the village was led by the Highlanders. As was often the case, high on adrenaline, they ran too far beyond their own support.
And they pushed them south of the river, and the French infantry turn tail and head towards their lines up that slope behind us. But at a vital moment, French cavalry see that we've got light troops charging in with bayonets and see them on the south side of the river.
Well, we've got a good first-hand account of this from Thomas Pocock of the 71st.
Fantastic.
So let me read it. I think you're going to enjoy this. It really sets the scene. The British officers are restraining their men still as death. Steady, lads, steady is all you hear, and that in an undertone. The French had lost a great number of men in the streets. We pursued them about a mile out of town, trampling over the dead and wounded. But their cavalry then bore down upon us and forced us back into the town, where we kept our ground in spite of their utmost efforts. In this affair, my life was most wonderfully preserved. In forcing the French through the town during our first advance, a bayonet went through between my side and the clothes of my knapsack, which stopped its progress. They had such a wonderful way of writing in those days, didn't they? I mean, you wouldn't phrase anything like this now. The Frenchman to whom the bayonet belonged fell, pierced by a musket ball from my rear rank man. Whilst freeing myself from the bayonet, a ball took off part of my right shoulder wing and killed my rear rank man, who fell upon me. Narrow as this escape was, I felt no uneasiness. I'd become so inured to danger and fatigue.
It's fantastic. I mean, he really was so close to death. He's getting bits of his uniform shot off and it's killing the guy behind him. And that shows you that kind of street fighting that we're going to see more during this battle as well.
And I also think it speaks to, we think of modern war with PTSD and, you know, the emotional impact of fighting in war. But I think it was just the same for those in those days, right? Like, we read that he'd become inured to danger and fatigue.
And what's that tell you? He's seen so much of it that he's no longer worried about his own life preservation. And his friend, he's just saved his life standing right on his shoulders, just been killed, and he just carries on.
Barely even gets a mention, just the rear rank man. Doesn't even mention his name. Yeah. Tough lads, for sure.
Yeah, respect to that.
The French try again to take the village, but they can't break through the determined British defenders. With the coming of darkness, the day's fighting finally petered out. The French had suffered nearly 700 casualties trying to take the village, while the Allied defenders had lost 259, including their commander, Lieutenant Colonel Williams, who was badly wounded. During the day's fighting, Thomas Pocock said that his shoulder was, quote, black as coal, after firing 107 musket balls, an impressive number and testament to the fierceness of the fight. So Marcus, mate, it's day 2 of the battle. We've got a bit of a tactical pause here, haven't we? What happens down here by the river?
Yeah, everything just takes a still moment. And the British have fought forward of the village and then been pushed back in. And so this village river causes just a little bit of a stopping point. And both sides come down to refill their canteens and take water, and some sides do a little bit of laundry. And because they're leaning in and this river is all we've got, they're very close. And they start to talk to each other, and they put their hands out to say that there's no fighting going to take place. And then eventually they shake hands. And the broken French from the British boys and the probably quite good English from the French, they start to strike up a conversation. And it turns out some of the French soldiers have spent time in Britain, and they exchange some letters and some thoughts from back home. And a little game of chess breaks out onto one of the sides of the bank of the river from a travelling chess set. And it's just that little moment of the two sides know that fighting will start up again, but this is the closest they've been without bayonets fitted. So it's just that little pause, that tranquil moment, and a little bit of humanity amongst the fighting.
And I guess this is something that's as old as time, isn't it? That soldiers generally don't hate each other.
No, they've got to hate each other when the time comes and the blood's up. But actually, personally, they're just quite human. And the French are here because they're told to be here, and the Brits are the same, and they're both believing in their causes. So it just adds that little bit of human perspective to their sides.
So Marcus, we're up here on the hill behind the village, or on the edge of the village. What are we looking at? What's the significance of this terrain?
So we've got this height, and it extends both sides, and it shows that this area is good for defending for Wellington. He's chosen his ground wisely, as he often does time and time again, with the village in the centre as there's a gentle slope, and that's why it's so key that both sides want to hold it. Down in the distance, there's the river that we see form the front line in the fraternisation on the second day, the 4th of May. And the narrow streets behind us that bring the French in and the British counter charges whilst the ridge extends out both sides. And basically we've got this rocky ground around us that would have formed the ridges, and it gets a good impression of the walls either side of me, of these granite slabs that would have been formed. And you can imagine any musket ball hitting against that, you're going to be completely safe the other side, as the lead soft metal would have splashed against it and fallen down on the ground. So you would have been very safe behind these 100 years old walls made out of solid Spanish granite.
So mate, just to illustrate the fact that we're right on the border here, you're now in Spain, I'm in Portugal. Time for me, 11 o'clock.
Yeah, and I'm 1 hour earlier. So it's really different that we're literally on the border and it's just marked by a farmer's fence. And that's all you've got to go off today because of different treaties. But back then, this made a difference to the campaign. But I'll get back to you in an hour because of the time difference.
Massena took the pause as an opportunity to do a recce. He realised that the British right was weak, and so he refocused his attack there. 3 infantry divisions and nearly all of his cavalry, a total of 17,000 infantry and 3,500 sabres. The new plan was to hit the Allied right flank hard at first light on the 5th of May, and then, as Wellington inevitably rushed reserves to stop them, Massena would once again renew his brutal frontal attack against the village of Fuentes de Onoro. Had Wellington spread himself too thin? He has one unit, an untested one, with which to block the French assault.
So he pushes out his 7th Division off to this area.
Division.
They're known as Wellington's Mongols, yes. And they're out here, mostly made up of quite new units in a real ragtag, hence their nickname. And just off to the side, meant to be bricking their flank in, is a unit of Spanish partisans.
Oh, the famous guerrillas.
The guerrillas. And they join the army to help bolster the numbers, but that's his extreme right at Poco Velo, this village that we're in. And then you've got the 7th Division with us, and they are a ragtag bunch of units, but they're quite far away from Wellington's main army.
And am I right in saying there was even Frenchmen with the 7th, the Chasseurs Britanniques? What can you tell us about them? A fascinating unit.
Very interesting history to them, that they were raised as royalists to fight against the revolutionary French, ended up via the Russian army and into British service. But by this point in the war, lots of the original members, the French royalists, have deserted or been killed, and so they're made up quite a lot of prisoners who've been offered a second chance, and their numbers we know are made up of Czechs, Poles and deserted French soldiers back into the army. And they've got one of the highest, if not the highest, desertion rates, and they've been told by this point of the war not to do picket duty because so many of them, 50 to 20 men a night, would disappear into the lines and go back and join the French. But amongst them, they've got Brunswickers, they've got the 68th Durhams, and there's some solid units in there.
Why the 7th stuck out here on the right flank when they're the most inexperienced unit, and what happens?
I think it's Wellington's biggest mistake here. He sees the village of Poco Velo, he puts some Spanish partisans into there that have joined onto the army, and he thinks that his flank is quite secure because he's got the villagers, but he's a bit too far, and there's no communication line between the 7th and the centre of his position.
Big mistake.
Big mistake. Probably Wellington's biggest mistake. And
of the war?
Of the war, arguably, apart from maybe the siege of Burgos. He does admit that this was a bit of a mistake afterwards and knows how close run this is. And the problem is, not only are they exposed, but French cavalry the day before have spotted dead ground just behind that area, and that they can manoeuvre up into under Massena.
It's not looking good. Could Wellington be outflanked and defeated? What happens next? In the open and at the mercy of enemy cavalry, 2 battalions of the 7th Division had a mammoth task ahead of them. The French cavalry, sensing blood, pounced on the disordered troops and began inflicting heavy casualties on them.
That's it, they've only got the partisans really to rely upon, and what they haven't realised is Massena's cavalry are using the dead ground just off to the side to bring themselves in. And by using that dead ground, that means covered low area that can't be seen, they get amongst the 7th Division before they form into square, and they're caught in line. This is the rock, paper, scissors of the Napoleonic War, and they're going to beat them. They smash through the lines, they can cause huge casualties, and they cause a lot of damage to these British troops, Wellington's Mongols, whilst they're caught in line. But there's still some hope for them. Wellington spots that this is happening and sends in the Light Division.
Good old Light Division, what happens?
And they really come to the rescue. Like the cavalry films of old with John Wayne, in they come over the hill, at the double, quick pace. They fight back against the cavalry, they form into square, and they help the 7th Division withdraw, and the units are actually marching in square.
In battalion squares?
In battalion squares. They're actually roughly rectangles, we call them, but they're called a square with their right angled sides, and that's a really hard thing to manoeuvre and then get back down, men kneeling as the cavalry come closer and keeping those straight line. Really good discipline, especially from the light troops. Whilst they're doing that, the 95th Rifles and the Portuguese Cazadores push out into these rocks, into these bits of shrub, and they start to skirmish against cavalry, picking off leaders, officers, guidon holders, that's flags, and trumpeters, and causing disruption amongst the French cavalry, and that takes the heat out of their fire. And whilst they're doing that, some of the British guns keep firing as well.
Oh, these are horse artillery.
Horse artillery, and we've got Ramsay's men under Bull.
A lot of paintings of this, isn't there?
This is a great moment. So they keep firing as the French cavalry are getting closer and closer, probably switching to canister, which turns their guns into like giant shotguns. They're tin cans packed with musket balls. And they keep going so much that the cavalry surround them. And what they do is they limber up their guns, and I imagine in very quick time, mount their guns, and they draw their sabres and they charge back through, reportedly smashing through French sabres with their own, protecting their guns. And in the artillery, our guns are our colours, and they hold the regimental pride. And so they save them and they save their honour. They actually manage to get back onto higher ground behind us, unlimber their guns and return fire upon the enemy.
And how important does that prove to be?
It's important. We've saved 2 divisions of troops. We've solidified the right flank, but had to bring it back in. It means Wellington almost lost a lot of men, but they just pulled out the bag with good discipline and reliable upon their friends. This is real daring do stuff, kill or be killed, and almost being completely surrounded, just about managed to extract, by the skin of your teeth.
And so now Massena realises he can't come around the flank, so he's going to have one last go at smashing through the village.
He does. That centre village that we see on the first day of the fighting is going to see a lot more now.
Marshal Massena now switched his focus back to the village. He wanted a stand-up brawl to smash through the British line with 3 entire infantry divisions. Just behind the village were the hard-fighting Irishmen of the 88th, part of Major General Thomas Picton's 3rd Division. Amongst them was Captain William Grattan, who recalled, "Every street and every angle of the street were different theatres for the combatants. Inch by inch was gained and lost in turn. Whenever the enemy were forced back, fresh troops and fresh energy on the part of their officers impelled them on again, and towards midday the town presented a shocking sight. Our Highlanders lay dead in heaps. The French grenadiers with their immense caps and gaudy plumes in piles of 20 and 30 together, some dead, others wounded, with barely strength sufficient to move. It was impossible for them to crawl out of range of the dreadful fire of grape and round shot which the enemy poured into the town. Great numbers perished in this way, and many were pressed to death in the streets. But the French, in their desperation, kept coming, and eventually, through the weight of numbers, pushed the redcoats out of the village and onto the slopes beyond. The battle's about to be lost, but could one more determined counterattack by an elite battalion change things?
Colonel Wallace of the 88th Connaught Rangers.
Great regiment,
but known as the Devil's Own for their slight ill discipline and being kind outside of battle, but their ferocity in battle. And he turns to his commander, Ned Pakenham, Wellington's brother-in-law, and asks for permission to retake the village. Ned Pakenham gives permission, and apparently Wellington gives a sly nod, a seal of approval. And then these men, the 88th Connaught Rangers, fix bayonets and they come down and they scream their famous Gallic war charge, Fog on Balloch.
For we're the Connaught Rangers, the lads to face all dangers, Fog a Balloch, clear the way.
Which is Irish for mind the way, clear the way. And that's a warning to anybody facing them. And down they come. And it's worthy of note, these French, some of them are conscripts, yes, but lots of them are veterans who've served several years. And it's a bit of a mistake thinking that the French are easy targets. They've defeated armies all over Europe, but they're here and they're ready to be defeated at the hands. We've got Irish, Scots, English, Portuguese, Welsh, and a few other nationalities in the mix, Germans included. And this is
even some Frenchmen.
Even some French of the Chasseurs Britanniques especially, and they clear back down the village. And as the French columns go streaming back out over the river, and the ridges are only just held by the British, it's a close won victory, but at the end of the day, the Redcoats holding the village here.
The battle for the village had been a brutal gutter fight, but the British had been victorious. By 2 p.m. the fighting fizzled out. Without control of the village and with his artillery outnumbered and outgunned, Massena realised that a general attack along the rest of the line was hopeless.
So where does that leave us strategically at the end of the battle?
Strategic at the end of the battle, the French have to face a close defeat, and they've managed to be repulsed from their invasion. The Portuguese border is basically a mile behind us, so they don't have that last invasion.
And because they were in Almeida as well, weren't they? So they couldn't break through. They couldn't get the reinforcements and supplies into them now.
We're really fighting over these border areas of Ciudad Rodrigo and Almeida, the keys to Portugal and Spain. And without taking those and the frontier itself, they're basically repulsed. Massena himself is recalled, and Napoleon says to him, "You are no longer Massena," because he's such the sweet child of victory. He's such a confident and successful general, and a scathing comment that you are no longer yourself, and he's removed. But Wellington himself, he fought such a close victory, he gave praise to his enemy by saying he would have lost if Boney had been there. Quote. And he thinks that just a different commander who just had a few more different decisions would have won this day. It was that close run thing.
The Battle of Fuentes de Onoro had been an incredibly close-run fight. The ground hadn't been particularly favourable for a prolonged defence, and the Allied right flank had come dangerously close to being turned on the morning of the 5th of May. But Wellington had done it again. Meanwhile, another brutal battle is about to be fought near Badajoz. Marshal Soult is attacking, and he's met at the village of Albuera by an Allied force under the command of Marshal Beresford. It's the bloodiest battle of the peninsula, and it's the subject of our next video, so be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell so you don't miss that. Special thanks to Marcus, who is a guide himself and has his own YouTube channel, that's on screen now. And also thanks to those of you that supported this trip to the peninsula, including Paul Richardson. Thanks for your support, mate, it's very much appreciated. Going forwards, if you want to help us increase awareness of British military history, then please join my YouTube membership or become a patron over at patreon.com/redcoathistory. It really helps. Okay, I'll see you next week.